So today, continuing with the book of Esther, we do a little background to remind us that this was happening again right after the reign of Darius of Persia. It's in 480 BC. And again, there were Jews at this time at the temple. There were Jews in Jerusalem. Ezra will be coming in about a decade or so, and he will then start working on the walls and stuff, and then later will come Nehemiah. But there are Jews that have been sent out that were allowed to go by Cyrus. And so there's a Jewish presence. This isn't in the 70 years. Of course, this is after the 70 years. But we see again the story of Ahasuerus, and he has a wife, and she does not obey. And so he gets rid of her, and he sets up this gathering. He was told by chamberlains and counselors that why don't you gather up all the beautiful young virgins, and we'll purify them, and we'll teach them, and then you'll pick one of them as your queen. Again, I can't lean too hard on how good this king is. He could have said, nope, I just want them all. Line them up, just put them in rooms, and I'll see one when I'm ready. A lot of kings did that. I'm just going to lean on how good this man was. And of course, Esther is wonderful. She is so wonderful that it seems like he loves her more. He thinks that she's giving more to him than he is. I'm so delighted with you. I'm so delighted with you. I'll give you half of my kingdom, which was a euphemism, of course, hyperbole of how wonderful he felt. But we see him doing this, and he gathers all these women up. They spend a year purifying them, getting their bodies and their minds, training them to be the queen. And so it isn't just a pretty face. This isn't Cinderella. You just get it for free. There's some work to be done for these women. And the word gathered, like I said, I can't lean on that too hard. But these women were not herded, with swords. You will be in this contest. No, if they didn't want to be, then it was, this posting of probably anyone who wants to in Shushan gathered together. So, and the chamberlain liked Esther and gave her also some maids to help work with her. And they spent 6 months in beautification and another 6 months in education and beautification with the oils and stuff. And each woman got to go in on her own, create her own style, get her own dresses, become herself, her own makeup, whatever she thought, and the king would spend an evening. I don't know if there were dalliances or not. I don't know what happened there. But again, the idea that, there's more to it than we make sex a big deal in the 21st century. We don't know exactly where it sits here. We act like it's a big deal. If it was a big deal, he wouldn't have had to do this whole thing because he was looking for character. He was looking for that loyalty. He's looking for that goodness, that purity. And that's what Esther brought to the table. I don't think they had anything that first night. Don't think that this man would have polluted that ground like that. If he wanted to, he sure was going a long way about it. I'm going to wait a whole year. I'm leaning on that maybe a little too hard. But I really like what I'm seeing of Ahasuerus, and I'm really liking what I'm seeing of Esther. To me, Boaz and Ruth, Ahasuerus and Esther are heroes, all four of them. Heroes of masculinity, the two men. Heroes of femininity, the two women. We would do well to stop and really look at the characters of these men. Both of them were powerful men in their own right. Boaz was not a poor man. If he was running a household of hundreds of people, if he had all these people around, and we discussed how he would have to work with security and economics, basically, he was a king over a smaller domain. Here, Ahasuerus is a king over a larger domain. And they could have run those things as they wanted. They had the power, but they did not have the authority. And again, I lean on that for us men. The world thinks that we are going to use our power for negative and use our power over, but we're supposed to look at our authority, and our authority will tell us how to use that power to, giving power to the wife and giving power to the children. So he has this, and he loves Esther. Esther goes in very kind of plain but good, and she's pretty and she's thoughtful. She's, of course, been purified with 6 months of oil treatments and all these things. And she's not just a pretty face, and he really loves her, this whole package love. And so Esther becomes queen, and there's this great banquet for her. But there's this fellow named Haman, and Haman wants to, he wants to be powerful, and he's under the king, and he has a power and authority. And when he goes out, people kneel. Well, there's one guy doesn't kneel, and that's Mordecai. And he is disdained about this, and even it's noticed by his friends and the people around him how one guy, and this one guy sticks at him, so he decides to set up this con, if you will, because he has some of the power by telling the king a certain narrative a certain way, and the king gives him the ring and says, "You take care of it." Well, he writes a decree that 6 months from the decree, on a certain day, he gets that day by lot. That's called the pure. When he would do, and he rattled the dice, and he picked a number for the day, a number for the month. So it was picked by randomness. That's why they call it Purim. And so he picked a certain day, Adar, which was in our December, and the 13th day. Okay, so on the 13th day of Adar, everyone in the province can kill the Jews and take their spoil. You can just take from them their open season. And the Jews had enemies, by the way. They had enemies because they wouldn't participate in many of the things going on, because they did have a specific worship of God a certain way. And this might have made them look haughty, or make them look aloof, make them, they not their laws about Yahweh and how they feel and their culture were in stark contrast to many of the paganism that was going on around them, kind of like Christianity is today with non-Christian culture. You don't have to be ardently against anybody just for your lifestyle to be an affront to them. We see that a lot even now. So he has this set up, and there's a small story I'm going to remind us that Mordecai would go every day to see Esther. And one time while he was waiting, he heard a couple of men were plotting against the king to kill the king. And he tells Esther. And Esther tells the king looks into it and has the two men executed. This comes in later in the story. In chapter 4, we have Mordecai perceived all that was done. He rent his clothing and put on sackcloth and went in the midst of the city and cried with a loud wail and a bitter cry. And here's this one man, and all the Jews kind of join this. They're going to be extinct in 6 months. And he even came through the king's gate. And Esther and the chamberlain saw that he was doing, but Esther didn't know what was going on. Sent the chamberlains down to figure it out, to find out. And his name is Hatash. And he went down and found out what was going on. Esther sent him clothing, sent him stuff to take care of this issue, but he rejected it. And then she finds out why. And then he tells her, he starts telling her what the problem is, that let it be known that the people of the king's province do know that whosoever, whether man or woman, shall not come into the king, into the inner court, unless they're called. So the idea is where I'm going to is, there's going to be a problem, and she needs to go talk to the king. But she goes, I can't go unless I'm called. In other words, I just don't go knock on his door. That's not how it works. And I haven't been called in 30 days. He might not call me for a long time. He calls me when he's ready to see me. Now, I don't go knock. If I do, that could be a death penalty. That could be a time of death for me. Now, it seems like there was a death penalty. Obviously, Vashti didn't do it. But this is a death penalty to approach the court unless he takes his golden scepter and allows you to speak. So she does run a risk. It's a 50-50. If he's having a bad day or he doesn't want to, and I know I leaned really hard on a good man that Ahasuerus is, but he's also, here he's being stern, and this is a law. We bind ourselves by our laws. That's something that also they were doing about Vashti, is we bind ourselves by our laws. If the law says this and this, then that's the way it was. And maybe that law was established also to control the court. So the king can control the court of who comes in and who doesn't. And it's for everyone. No one gets a pass. No one can come in and say, well, I'm a special person. So we are bound by our laws. We can be good men that are bound by our laws. And she would have to be put to death. That's how the law works. When you're a king, and right now he's not above the law, you will have lawlessness if anyone is above the law. In fact, Jesus was not above the law. In fact, he got under the law so that he might be sin for us and die for us under the law. He didn't have to. He could have stepped above the law and said, hey, I'm above the law. I'll do what I want. You guys can pay for your own sins. But he went under the law to redeem us. So the law is actually a good thing. The Bible, Paul calls it a schoolmistress. It teaches us things. But then we put it away because we're supposed to live outside the law. Now that gets theological, and I know I'm running around in circles a little bit with that. But there was a law in the books. that you could not go to the king unless he did it. And she would be putting her life into her hands. And the whole court would see that he would be honor bound to fulfill that law. So that's where I'm kind of leaning on this. We see kings as being capricious. They can just do what they want to do and change the laws, and you go back and forth. But not good kings. And good kings also have the laws that were already established. If you realize in the time of Nehemiah that Artaxerxes saw that both Darius and Cyrus had backed the Jews being in the land, that he backed that law, because you create lawlessness in your kingdom by illegally going back against the other laws. I mean, it really gets funny when we think about this, though. Why didn't the good man just say, "Hey, Esther, come on in"? Well, that's what the golden scepter was for. That was grace. So he had the power to absolve her, but he didn't have to legally. Anyway, I need to back off some of that, but that's the problem here that she sees. And Mordecai says that if you do this, it says there will be deliverance from another place. God will deliver his people, but don't you know that you might have been put in this place for this purpose? And Mordecai answered to her, "Think not that thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. For if they altogether holdest their peace, but if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall the enlargement and deliverance of the Jews come from another place, but thy and thy father's household shall be destroyed. And who knowest if thou art come to this kingdom for such a time as this?" So he tells her, you might have been put here. This wisp of a girl, 120 pounds, probably between, like I said, 15 and 25, but you're put there for this reason. So so she calls him and the Jews around him and her maids to pray and to fast for 3 days so she would know what to do. And so I think it's interesting that I think the fasting and praying, we as Christians kind of see that as sitting in the corner and being hungry. You're not eating and you're just praying. I think they were talking. I think that she had created rapport and trust and love with the people around her. And they would understand the king more than she would. She was kind of new to the situation. Maybe they warned her that, yeah, here's the problem. You can't go in unless he calls her. That's a problem. Number two, if you confront him among his boys, and you saw what happened, when he was among all these princes, and Vashti said no and created a problem, you can't go into the boys' room and make this statement out, because Haman and his men and his princes are there, and they can shut you down or, create pressure on the king that way. But if you tell him in private and Haman isn't around, then all he's got to do is bring it up in the court, and Haman can go, well, I didn't mean this and I didn't mean that. And it doesn't create anything. You got to find a way. And this isn't in there. I'm kind of reading a little bit in. I think that she talked among them is my point. And I think they together worked out this plan. Fasting, by the way, I'm going to take a moment, really helps the mind. Fasting isn't just, oh, if I fast, God sees me suffering and he gives me guidance. No, it's really good for cleansing the mind. It's good for working out a problem. A lot of times when we have a very stressful time and there's a problem going on, we forget to eat. We're so concentrated on this. But this is I'm not going to eat. I'm just going to drink. And I thought about a 3-day fast. And I thought, well, that would really be painful. So I wanted to see what Esther and her maids and chamberlains and all the Jews went through, and I did a 5-day fast. And I tell you what, it wasn't that bad. In fact, God has set up this body, believe it or not. Once you get past a day or a day and a half, your appetite goes off, and then you can cruise. Then you actually feel pretty good, and you feel focused. You've gotten the toxins out of your bodies, out of your bloodstream, out of your mind. Your mind is clearer. You're more focused. And I believe having all of that focused energy. I know Jesus said that we talked about some demons, that they don't come out without fasting and praying. Sometimes to see how you should handle a situation comes from being fasted and focused, and you can kind of see the problem there. And Jesus could see and analyze problems and fix them. It wasn't the methodology. It's almost like a good doctor who could may diagnose 3 different people with a similar ailments, but have them do 3 different things, because of the ailment, that kind of thing. One of them might get pills, the other one might get some sort of physical therapy, the other one might have to go to a hospital and have something changed inside. It's all based on the diagnosis, but they all get healed. So we tend to have this, almost mystic, thing going on with prayer and fasting when actually it's pretty systemic. So I'm going to say the power of fasting here helped them all focus in on the problem, help this new girl understand you can't go in there, you've got a problem. If you speak to him and all the boys are there, or if you speak to the king alone, you've got to get Haman and the king alone. And then they come up with this plan, which was brilliant. We'll set up a 2-day banquet. And the idea is that it looks like that the queen did do banquets from time to time. Like I said, Vashti was doing a banquet for the women. So it might be that the king tells them so-and-sos are visiting, or we've got ambassadors from here or there. We've got princes from here and there. So I need you to set up a banquet over here to show the goodness and the kindness and the strength of my kingdom over here. So you're amplifying my kingdom over here with the women, and we've got the men over here doing this thing, and I'm leading with them, and you're taking care of them. And I think there's a lot of power in what Vashti was doing. I think there's a lot of power in how Esther is trained, not just to sit around and wait, but to actually create this household and to create this place of respite and rest. And I think sometimes even the king, she would have to keep all of that up in case the king wanted to call and say, the king will be there this evening. So she's like, well, I'm going to have all the food ready, all the wine ready. I'm going to have the musicians ready. I'm going to be ready. And then the king's going to come and rest with me for a few days and have banquets and maybe go, whatever he does, shoot arrows or go sword fight or whatever he does to relax and unwind. He'll do that here. He might sleep in. He might get a back rub, whatever. And then he goes back to do his work, the house being a place of respite. So we see, I'm getting a little into chapter 5 here, that it came to pass on the third day that she put on her royal garment. So she's going in as royalty. She's not going in as just a person. And she goes and stands and risks her life at this moment. She doesn't know what's happened on the other side. They could be in deep negotiations, and he says no. They could be all kinds of stuff going on, struggles of all kinds with wars or insurrections and stuff, and he's just going to say no, and then she's dead. But he stands there, and the king is told that the queen, and she's dressed as the queen, is outside. And so he sends for her, and he extends the scepter. So he said, and he says, well, what can I do for you? What's your request? You give it even to half of my kingdom. Again, that's hyperbole, but how wonderful his feelings is for her. I'm so happy to see you. Oh, you're so beautiful, and I know what you mean to me. Ask anything, half of my kingdom. And so she goes, I would like to have Haman and you come to a banquet. I'm going to prepare. So she had a banquet prepared that day, and then she had another banquet prepared the next day. So she had 2 banquets set up. And that's part of the wisdom. You don't want to fire your gun too quickly. Get them all smoothed, get these men together, let them talk and laugh and giggle and listen to music and drink wine and stuff. And the next day, you pull the trigger. So that's what she's doing. So they go to this banquet, and the king caused Haman to make haste that he could go with Esther. So they go to the banquet. It's called the banquet of wine. It seems like that they had banquets for different things. Maybe you had like courses. When you go to a fine restaurant, they have different courses. So here she'd have wine and then have food, and maybe entertainment or whatever. And so in the wine, so she asks this and talks to her, and what is your petition? And he goes, tomorrow I want to have a banquet. I want to have you and Haman over. And a 2-day. And Haman is feeling full of himself. And he even tells his friends that day, after the banquet, he goes home and tells his friends and his wife how much the king has been glorifying in him, and how the queen even wants to have him over by himself. I mean, this might have been a big deal. Probably very rarely did the king host one of the princes. This could create, some sort of backlash, some sort of sense of favoritism. He might have had banquets with all the princes, that kind of thing. But Esther opens the door and asks that Haman alone and the king alone have this banquet. So now that it's on the queen that did this, not the king. So he's released from any kind of favoritism. Oh, okay, the queen has asked for it, and he sees this as an honor. Of course it is at the time. So he even tells his friends. But this whole thing, no matter how much he's doing here, Mordecai still sticks in his craw. The idea that Mordecai isn't going to bend before him. So he decides what he wants to do is he's going to kill a Jew. He raises a 10-foot gallows where he could hang people. And I looked at the measurements here, and so they were going to make this thing. It was going to be 10 feet tall, and they'd have a gallows and hang Mordecai. I don't know if this was legal or illegal. I don't know how he would trump up the charges or whatever. But he was going to do this. He was going to take that power. That's how much he hated Mordecai. And he couldn't even glory in what Esther was doing at the time, he's not seeing what was coming with the king. But we see that in the story that they have this one banquet, and at the banquet she asked for a second banquet the next day for him and Haman, again extending this honor out. And like I said, he goes home and sees his friends, but he is so desirous of killing Mordecai that he wants to set up this gallows. So he does this. But he says, "And tomorrow I am invited also to sit with the king, yet this availeth nothing, because that Jew Mordecai is sitting at the king's gate." So his wife and friends tell him, make a gallows and make it 50 cubits high, and I figured that's about 9 or 10 feet. And then, and tomorrow speak unto the king that Mordecai may be hanged thereupon, and go thou in merrily with the king unto the banquet. Now, I didn't see that till now. See, this is what I love about the grid work and why I struggle sometimes with it. The little things that you think you saw, and then you see something. Because a minute ago I was saying, well, I don't know how he's going to do this, legal or illegal. Well, guess what? The Word of God shows you right here. He was going to con. It's like there were two things going on. Esther is going to reveal the truth of Haman's conspiracy against the Jews. But Haman was going to do a conspiracy against Mordecai in that next banquet. So we see how now we've got these two people now have their own, they're going to intersect with the king. And they both have something that they want the king to do. Esther wants the king to free the Jews. Haman wants the king to kill a Jew tomorrow. And then, of course, he's going to trump up a charge, obviously. So that's what's happening here. We have a banquet coming the next day. And so we can see this coming to a head. If this was a movie or a TV show, I would be putting a to be continued here, because that's what I'm going to do. But it's interesting to see these nuances. And again, like I said, with the grid work, you'll see one or two. Like I said, I didn't even see that till now. Let the gallows be made 50 cubits. And speak unto the king that Mordecai may be hanged thereupon. Wow, conspiracy. I love it. This is such a great story. To be